The night air in the kingdom of Oakhaven was usually filled with the gentle symphony of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the ancient forest that bordered their lands. But tonight, a heavy silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. A blood moon cast an eerie, crimson glow upon the thatched roofs of the village and the stone walls of the castle. It was a night for unease, a night when old tales of monsters and dark magic felt chillingly real. Inside the castle, in the grand throne room, the silence was even more profound. Amari, the newly crowned Queen Alpha, sat upon the oaken throne, her knuckles white as she gripped the carved wolves that formed its arms. She was a striking figure, with skin the color of rich earth and eyes that held the fierce, intelligent spark of a predator. Her braids, interwoven with silver thread, cascaded over her shoulders like a royal mantle. She was young, barely 25 winters old, but she carried herself with the authority of a ruler twice her age. Her council of elders sat before her, their faces etched with worry. The oldest among them, a man named Alara with a beard as white as the snows of winter, finally broke the silence. His voice, though frail, carried the weight of his years. "The moon bleeds, my queen. It is an omen. The shadow pack stirs." Amari's gaze did not waver from the large open window that framed the blood-red moon. "Omens are for those who fear the future, Ilara. I intend to shape it." But the whispers, Amari, another elder, a woman named Lyra, insisted. "They say the Shadow Pack has a new alpha, one who practices the forbidden blood magic. They say he can control the beasts of the forest, that he can turn our own wolves against us." A low growl rumbled in Amari's chest, a sound that was not entirely human. The blood of the first wolf, the progenitor of her line, ran strong in her veins. She was not just a queen, she was an alpha, a leader of a people who could, when they chose, shed their human skin and run with the wolves. "Let him have his whispers and his shadows," she said, her voice a low, dangerous purr. "We have the strength of the Oakhaven pack. We have loyalty. We have honor." But even as she spoke the words, a sliver of doubt pricked at her heart. The Shadow Pack had been their bitter rivals for generations, a rogue clan that had splintered from their own centuries ago, embracing the darker, more violent aspects of their shared heritage. They had always been a threat, but the stories she was hearing now were different, more sinister. Suddenly, a commotion erupted from the courtyard below. Shouts of alarm and the clash of steel echoed through the stone halls. Amari was on her feet in an instant, her hand instinctively going to the hilt of the ancient sword that rested at her side. Her guards, a dozen of her finest warriors, moved to surround her, their own weapons drawn. "Stay here," she commanded her council, her voice leaving no room for argument. She strode towards the grand doors of the throne room, her guards falling into formation around her. As she descended the winding stone staircase, the sounds of battle grew louder. She could hear the snarls of wolves, not the familiar, almost melodic howls of her own pack, but something guttural and savage. When she reached the courtyard, the scene that greeted her was one of chaos. Several of her guards lay injured, their silver armor stained with blood. They were fighting not just men, but massive, shadowy wolves with eyes that glowed with an unnatural red light. These were not the wolves of Oakhaven. They were larger, more ferocious, and they fought with a terrifying intelligence. In the center of the courtyard stood a figure cloaked in darkness, a man whose face was obscured by a hood. He held a staff carved from a gnarled black wood, and with a guttural chant, he seemed to command the shadowy beasts. One of the monstrous wolves lunged at a young guard, its jaws snapping inches from his throat. With a speed that seemed almost supernatural, Amari was there, her sword a blur of motion as she parried the wolf's attack. The beast, surprised by her sudden appearance, recoiled, its red eyes fixing on her. A low, menacing growl escaped its throat. The hooded figure turned his attention to her, his unseen face seeming to radiate a palpable aura of malice. "The little queen herself," he hissed, his voice like the slithering of a snake. "I am Malakor, and I have come to claim what is rightfully mine." Amari stood her ground, her gaze unflinching. She could feel the power of her alpha blood surging through her, a primal strength that dispelled all fear. "You have come to your death," she declared, her voice ringing with a power that made the very stones of the courtyard seem to tremble. The battle for Oakhaven had begun. Chapter 2: The Whispers of the Ancestors. The courtyard was a maelstrom of flashing steel and snarling beasts. Malakor's shadow wolves were unlike any creature Amari had ever faced. They were preternaturally strong, their movements unnaturally swift, and their eyes burned with a malevolent intelligence that spoke of dark magic. Her guards fought with the courage of lions, their silver-tipped spears and swords finding their marks, but for every shadow wolf that fell, two more seemed to materialize from the encroaching darkness. Amari moved like a whirlwind, her ancestral sword, Moonglimmer, a silver arc of death in the crimson moonlight. The blade, forged in the heart of a fallen star, hummed with a power of its own, biting deep into the shadowy forms of the wolves. She fought with a grace and ferocity that was breathtaking to behold, her every move a dance of deadly precision. Yet, even as she cut down one beast after another, she could feel the tide of the battle turning against them. Malakor stood at the edge of the fray, his black staff pulsating with a sickly purple light. He did not engage in the fight directly but seemed to orchestrate the chaos with a flick of his wrist, a whispered incantation. He was the heart of the attack, the source of the dark power that animated his monstrous pack. Amari knew she had to reach him. With a fierce battle cry, she broke through the line of shadow wolves, her eyes locked on her target. The beasts snapped and clawed at her, but she was a force of nature, her determination an unbreachable shield. As she closed the distance, Malakor finally turned his full attention to her. He raised his staff, and a bolt of dark energy shot towards her. Amari raised Moonglimmer, the ancient sword glowing with a soft, white light that met the dark energy with a deafening crash. The force of the impact threw her back, and she landed hard on the stone courtyard, the breath knocked from her lungs. Before she could recover, a massive shadow wolf was upon her, its hot breath reeking of death and decay. Just as its jaws were about to close around her throat, a silver blur shot past her, and the wolf was thrown back, a spear embedded in its side. It was Thane, the captain of her guard, his face a grim mask of determination. He helped her to her feet, his hand steady on her arm. "My queen, we cannot hold them. We must retreat to the inner keep." Amari's jaw tightened. Retreat was a word she despised, a concept that went against every fiber of her being. But as she looked around at her fallen and wounded guards, at the seemingly endless tide of shadow wolves, she knew he was right. They were outnumbered and outmatched. To continue this fight would be a senseless slaughter. "Sound the retreat," she commanded, her voice cutting through the din of battle. "To the keep. Seal the gates." The retreat was a desperate, bloody affair. Every inch of ground was paid for in blood and sacrifice. Amari and Thane fought side by side, a bulwark against the encroaching darkness, allowing the remnants of their forces to pull back to the relative safety of the inner keep. The massive iron gates groaned shut just as the last of their warriors stumbled through, the shadow wolves clawing and snarling at the unyielding barrier. The sounds of the attack faded, replaced by an eerie silence. The courtyard was littered with the bodies of both guards and shadow wolves, the latter dissolving into wisps of black smoke. The air was thick with the stench of blood and dark magic. In the aftermath, as the healers tended to the wounded and the dead were counted, a heavy gloom fell over the survivors. They had held the keep, but the cost had been high. And they all knew that this was just the beginning. Malakor had not been defeated, merely repelled. He would be back. Later that night, Amari stood in the Hall of Ancestors, a long, torchlit chamber lined with the portraits of the queens who had ruled before her. Her gaze fell upon the portrait of her mother, a woman with the same fierce eyes and determined jaw. A wave of grief, still raw and sharp, washed over her. Her mother had been a wise and just ruler, but she had been taken by a sudden illness just 6 moons ago, forcing Amari to ascend the throne long before she felt ready. As she stood there, lost in her thoughts, a soft, ethereal light began to emanate from her mother's portrait. The painted eyes seemed to glow with an inner fire, and a voice, faint as the rustling of leaves, whispered in her mind. "The blood of the first wolf flows in your veins, my daughter. You are stronger than you know. Seek the Sunstone. It is our only hope." Amari gasped, her hand flying to her chest. The voice was her mother's, but it was also something more, something older and more powerful. It was the collective voice of the ancestors, the spirits of the queens who had come before her, reaching out to her from beyond the veil. The Sunstone. It was a legend, a myth, a bedtime story told to children. A relic of the first queen, said to hold the power of the sun itself, a power that could banish any darkness. Most believed it to be a mere fairy tale, lost to the mists of time. But the ancestors had spoken. It was real. And it was their only hope against Malakor and his dark magic. A new sense of purpose, a fierce resolve, settled in Amari's heart. She would not let her kingdom fall. She would not let her people be consumed by the darkness. She would find the Sunstone, and she would use it to destroy Malakor and his shadow pack once and for all. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger, but Amari was not afraid. She was the fearless Queen Alpha, and she would not fail. Chapter 3: The Path of the Eclipse. The first light of dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of orange and pink, but the sunrise brought little warmth to the besieged castle of Oakhaven. A palpable sense of dread lingered in the air, a shadow that the morning sun could not dispel. The remnants of the previous night's battle were a stark reminder of the new and terrible threat they faced. Amari had not slept. After the ancestral vision in the Hall of Queens, she had gathered her most trusted advisors in the War Council chamber. The room, usually a place of lively debate and strategic planning, was now somber and subdued. The faces of Alara, Lyra, and Thane were etched with a mixture of exhaustion and apprehension. "The Sunstone," Alara murmured, stroking his long white beard. "I have not heard that name spoken outside of a bard's tale since I was a boy. Are you certain of what you heard, my queen?" "I am certain," Amari replied, her voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. "The ancestors spoke to me. They showed me the path." She unrolled a large, ancient map on the heavy oak table, a map that depicted not just the kingdom of Oakhaven, but the surrounding lands, much of which was uncharted and marked with warnings of mythical beasts and treacherous terrain. Her finger traced a path that led from Oakhaven, through the treacherous Whisperwood Forest, across the soaring Dragon's Tooth Mountains, and into the desolate sunken lands. The Sunstone is hidden in the lost Temple of the Sun, which is said to lie at the heart of the sunken lands. A heavy silence fell upon the room. The sunken lands were a place of legend, a vast desert of black sand and volcanic glass, said to be cursed by the gods. No one who had ventured into the sunken lands had ever returned. "My queen," Thane said, his voice laced with concern. "That is a perilous journey. The Whisperwood is home to creatures of nightmare, and the Dragon's Tooth Mountains are impassable in this season. And the sunken lands, they are a death sentence." "To stay here is a death sentence," Amari countered, her gaze meeting his. "Malakor will return. His forces are stronger than ours, his magic a poison we cannot fight. The Sunstone is our only hope. I will not sit here and wait for the end to come. I will ride out to meet our destiny." Her words, filled with a conviction that was as unyielding as the mountains themselves, silenced all further protest. Her council could see the fire in her eyes, the unshakable resolve that was the hallmark of a true alpha. Preparations for the journey began at once, shrouded in secrecy. They could not let Malakor know of their plan. A small, elite group of warriors was chosen to accompany Amari, the bravest and most skilled in the kingdom. Thane, of course, would be at her side. He was not only the captain of her guard but her most trusted friend, a man who would lay down his life for her without a second thought. The journey was to be a small one, a fellowship of the finest warriors Oakhaven had to offer. Lyra's daughter, Alara, a skilled archer with eyes as sharp as a hawk's, and a pair of twin brothers Borin and Gorin, renowned for their skill with the axe and their unshakable courage, were chosen to accompany them. A young, gifted healer named Anya, whose knowledge of herbs and poultices was said to be magical in itself, completed their small band. As they made their final preparations, a sense of foreboding hung in the air. The path they were about to take was not just a physical journey, but a spiritual one, a trial that would test their courage, their loyalty, and their very souls. Amari knew that the road ahead would be fraught with peril, that they would face dangers beyond their imagining. Before their departure, Amari sought out Alara one last time. The old man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and wisdom, looked at her with a sad, knowing smile. "The path you walk is the path of the eclipse," he said, his voice a low, prophetic whisper. "A path where light and shadow meet, where the fate of our world will be decided. Be strong, my queen. And remember that the blood of the first wolf is not just a source of strength, but a beacon in the darkness." With his words echoing in her mind, Amari led her small band of warriors out of Oakhaven under the cloak of night. They rode not on horses, but on the backs of giant grey wolves, the loyal companions of the Oakhaven pack. Their paws made no sound on the soft earth as they melted into the shadows of the ancient forest, leaving the besieged castle and the sleeping kingdom behind them. As they rode deeper into the Whisperwood, the familiar sights and sounds of their homeland faded, replaced by an eerie silence and the menacing shapes of twisted ancient trees. The air grew cold, and a thick, unnatural fog rolled in, obscuring their path. They were in Malakor's territory now, a land tainted by his dark magic. The journey to find the Sunstone had begun, and the first test of their courage was upon them. Chapter 4. The Heart of the Whisperwood. The Whisperwood was aptly named. The ancient trees, their gnarled branches reaching towards the sky like skeletal fingers, seemed to whisper secrets to one another on the wind. But these were not the gentle whispers of a summer breeze. They were cold, malevolent whispers that slithered into the mind, planting seeds of doubt and fear. Amari and her companions rode in silence, their senses on high alert. The giant grey wolves they rode moved with a stealthy grace, their paws making no sound on the moss-covered ground. But even their keen senses were muted in this enchanted forest. The thick, swirling fog distorted sounds and played tricks on the eyes, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Days bled into nights with no sight of the sun or the moon, only the perpetual twilight of the forest canopy. The whispers grew more insidious, preying on their deepest fears. Amari heard the voice of her mother, filled with disappointment, telling her she was not ready to be queen. Thane heard the dying screams of the men he had lost in the courtyard battle, their voices accusing him of failure. The twin brothers, Borin and Gorin, heard each other's voices, twisting their brotherly bond into a bitter rivalry. Ilara, the young archer, saw visions of her arrows missing their mark, of her letting her queen down in a moment of crisis. And Anya, the healer, was haunted by the faces of those she had been unable to save. It was a powerful, insidious magic, designed to break their spirits and turn them against one another. Amari, her mind fortified by the strength of her alpha blood, fought against the encroaching despair. She knew that to succumb to the whispers would be to doom them all. "Do not listen," she commanded, her voice cutting through the fog and the whispers. "It is a trick, a phantom of the mind. Trust in what you know to be true. Trust in each other." Her words, spoken with the unshakable authority of a true leader, were a lifeline in the sea of despair. Her companions rallied, drawing strength from her resolve. They focused on her, on the steady, reassuring presence of their queen, and the whispers began to lose their power. But the forest had other dangers in store for them. One evening, as they made camp in a small clearing, they were attacked by a pack of giant, venomous spiders. The creatures, as large as wolves, descended from the trees on thick, silken threads, their multiple eyes glowing with a malevolent green light. A fierce battle ensued. Borin and Gorin's axes became a blur of motion, cleaving through the spiders' armored carapaces. Ilara's arrows flew with deadly accuracy, finding the vulnerable spots in the creature's defenses. Thane and Amari fought back to back, their swords a whirlwind of silver and steel. Anya, though not a warrior, proved her worth by using her knowledge of herbs to create a pungent smoke that disoriented the spiders and drove them back. They fought with the coordinated precision of a well-oiled machine, their bond of loyalty and trust forged in the crucible of battle. They were more than just a queen and her subjects. They were a pack, a family, and they would fight to the death to protect one another. After a long and bloody fight, the last of the giant spiders lay dead, their green ichor staining the forest floor. They were all wounded, exhausted, but they were alive. And they were stronger for having faced the danger together. As they tended to their wounds, a new sound reached their ears, a sound that was even more terrifying than the whispers or the chittering of the spiders. It was a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from the very heart of the forest, a sound that vibrated in their bones and sent a shiver of primal fear down their spines. Suddenly, the trees around them began to tremble, and the ground shook as if a giant was walking towards them. A monstrous form emerged from the fog, a creature of nightmare-made flesh. It was a grotesque, a legendary beast of the Whisperwood, a horrifying amalgamation of a bear, a wolf, and a serpent. Its massive body was covered in matted fur and scales, and its multiple heads, each with a gaping maw filled with razor-sharp teeth, snapped and snarled in a symphony of hunger and rage. The grotesque was a creature of immense power, a being that was said to be unkillable. It was the guardian of the Whisperwood, the heart of the forest's dark magic. And it was blocking their path. Amari stared at the monstrous creature, her heart pounding in her chest. This was a foe unlike any they had faced before, a true test of their courage and strength. But as she looked at the faces of her companions, she saw not fear, but a grim determination. They had come too far to turn back now. "For Oakhaven!" she cried, raising Moonglimmer high in the air. The ancient sword glowed with a brilliant, white light, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. Her companions echoed her cry, their voices a defiant roar that challenged the very heart of the Whisperwood. The battle for their lives, and for the fate of their kingdom, was about to begin. Chapter 5: The Serpent's Maw and the Mountain's Shadow. The grotesque was a terrifying spectacle of nature gone awry. Its bear-like body, covered in a patchwork of matted fur and shimmering scales, was a fortress of muscle and bone. The wolf heads, with their glowing red eyes and slavering jaws, snapped at the air with a bloodthirsty hunger, while the serpent head, its forked tongue flickering in and out, hissed a venomous challenge. "Spread out," Amari commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that defied the terror of the moment. "Aim for the heads. It's our only chance." Her companions obeyed without hesitation, their training and discipline taking over. Boren and Gorin, their twin axes a blur of motion, charged at the creature's legs, their powerful blows aimed at severing tendons and bringing the beast to its knees. Elara, her face a mask of concentration, knocked an arrow to her bow, her keen eyes searching for a moment of vulnerability. Thane, his shield held high, moved to draw the creature's attention, his taunts and feints a daring dance with death. Amari, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline, faced the grotesque head-on. Moonglimmer, the ancestral sword, hummed in her hand, its faint silvery light a stark contrast to the oppressive darkness of the forest. She knew that this was more than just a physical battle, it was a battle of wills, a test of her right to be alpha. The grotesque lunged at her, its multiple heads striking like a hydra. Amari moved with a supernatural grace and agility, her movements a fluid dance of evasion and attack. She ducked under a snapping wolf jaw, parried a venomous serpent strike with her sword, and rolled away from a crushing bear-like paw. She was not just a warrior, she was a force of nature in her own right, her senses heightened by the alpha blood that coursed through her veins. She could feel the rhythm of the beast's movements, anticipate its attacks, and see the fleeting moments of weakness in its defense. Meanwhile, her companions were fighting their own desperate battles. Boren and Gorin, with their relentless axe attacks, had managed to cripple one of the creature's legs, causing it to stumble and roar in pain. Elara, her patience rewarded, loosed an arrow that found its mark in the eye of one of the wolf heads, eliciting a howl of agony. Thane, his shield battered and dented, continued to hold the beast's attention, his courage a beacon in the chaos. But the grotesque was a creature of immense power and resilience. It shook off its injuries with a furious roar, its rage making it even more dangerous. It swatted Boren and Gorin aside like flies, their armored bodies crashing against the ancient trees. It spat a stream of venom at Elara, forcing her to abandon her position and seek cover. And it cornered Thane against a rock face, its serpent head poised for a fatal strike. Seeing her friends in peril, Amari knew she had to act, and act decisively. She had been fighting defensively, waiting for an opportunity, but now she had to create one. She took a deep breath, focusing all her energy, all her alpha power, into a single decisive strike. With a primal scream that was more wolf than human, she charged at the grotesque, her sword held high. She leaped onto its back, her boots finding purchase on its scaly hide, and scrambled up its massive form until she was standing on its shoulders, a small, defiant figure on a mountain of rage and fury. The beast thrashed wildly, trying to dislodge her, but she held on with a tenacious grip, her eyes fixed on the point where the three heads converged. It was a gamble, a desperate, all-or-nothing move, but it was their only hope. She raised Moonglimmer high above her head, the sword glowing with an almost blinding white light. She brought it down with all her might, plunging it deep into the creature's flesh, at the very heart of its being. A deafening, unearthly scream echoed through the forest as the grotesque writhed in agony. The light from Moonglimmer spread through its body, a purifying fire that consumed the dark magic that animated it. The creature's form began to dissolve, its flesh and bone turning to dust and smoke, until all that was left was a pile of black ash and the lingering stench of dark magic. Silence descended upon the forest, broken only by the ragged breaths of the survivors. They were battered, bruised, and bleeding, but they were alive. They had faced the heart of the Whisperwood and emerged victorious. As the first rays of genuine sunlight in days pierced through the forest canopy, they knew they had broken the forest's curse. The whispers were gone, replaced by the gentle, natural sounds of the woods. The path ahead was clear. They had survived the Whisperwood, but their journey was far from over. As they emerged from the forest, they were greeted by a new, even more daunting sight: the Dragon's Tooth Mountains, their snow-capped peaks soaring into the sky like the jagged teeth of some colossal mythical beast. The next leg of their journey, and the next set of challenges, awaited them. But as they looked at each other, their faces filled with a newfound confidence and a renewed sense of purpose. They knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. They were a pack, a family, and they would not be broken. Chapter 6: The Dragon's Tooth and the Skyfire. The transition from the oppressive gloom of the Whisperwood to the stark, vertical world of the Dragon's Tooth Mountains was both a relief and a new form of terror. The air, though thin and biting, was clean, free of the magical taint that had clouded their minds. But the landscape itself was a formidable adversary. Jagged peaks of grey stone clawed at the sky, their slopes covered in treacherous scree and ancient, grinding glaciers. The wind howled a ceaseless, mournful song through the narrow passes, a constant reminder of their insignificance in this colossal, untamed wilderness. Their wolves, bred for the forest, struggled on the sharp rocks, their paws tender and bleeding despite Anya's diligent care. The journey was slow and perilous. Every footstep was a calculated risk, every gust of wind a threat that could pluck them from the narrow ledges and cast them into the abyssal depths below. Amari led them with unwavering focus, her alpha senses, attuned to the rhythms of the natural world, helping them navigate the most treacherous paths, finding handholds where none seemed to exist. Days into their ascent, the sky turned a bruised, sickly shade of purple-gray. The wind, once a steady moan, rose to a frantic, shrieking crescendo. Snow began to fall, not in gentle flakes, but in a blinding, horizontal blizzard that reduced visibility to mere inches. They were caught in a skyfire, a storm of legendary ferocity known to the mountain tribes. "We need to find shelter. Now." Thane's voice was a roar, barely audible over the storm's fury. They huddled together against a rock face, a pathetic defense against the storm's raw power. The temperature plummeted, and the wind bit at their exposed skin with icy teeth. Amari scanned the cliff face, her eyes desperate. Through the swirling chaos of snow and wind, she saw it, a dark fissure, a slight indentation in the rock that might be the entrance to a cave. It was their only chance. With Borin and Gorin in the lead, using their axes to cut handholds into the icy rock, they began the painstaking traverse towards the fissure. It was a harrowing journey of 100 feet that felt like 100 miles. Just as the last of them, Elara, reached the relative safety of the ledge, a deep, groaning rumble echoed from the peaks above them. It was a sound more terrifying than any monster's roar. "Avalanche!" Thane bellowed. The world dissolved into a thundering, white chaos. A mountain of snow, ice, and rock descended upon them with the force of a tidal wave. Amari grabbed Anya, pulling the smaller woman into the mouth of the cave just as the white torrent roared past, its power so immense it threatened to suck the very air from their lungs. The entrance to the cave was buried, plunging them into absolute darkness and a sudden, deafening silence. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm them. They were trapped, buried alive. But Amari's voice, calm and steady, cut through the darkness. "Sound off. Is everyone all right?" One by one, their voices answered, shaken but alive. Borin had a dislocated shoulder, and Gorin had a deep gash on his leg, but thanks to Amari's quick thinking, they had all survived the initial impact. Anya, her hands steady despite the darkness and the cold, immediately went to work, using the faint glow of a phosphorescent moss she carried to tend to the twins' injuries. As Thane and Elara worked to assess the stability of their prison, Amari explored deeper into the cave. It was more than a simple fissure, it was the entrance to a larger system. As she moved further in, Moonglimmer began to emit a soft, pulsing light, its glow illuminating the cave walls. And on those walls, she saw something that made her forget the cold, the darkness, and the tons of rock and snow that trapped them. The walls were covered in ancient carvings. They were depictions of her people, of the first queen, of wolves and men fighting side by side against a creeping darkness. And there, at the center of it all, was the Sunstone. The carvings told a story, a history she had only known through fragmented legends. They depicted the path to the Temple of the Sun, not over the mountains, but through them. This cave was not a tomb, it was a doorway. "Look," she breathed, her voice filled with awe. Her companions gathered around, their faces illuminated by the sword's gentle light. The carvings were a map, a guide. But as they deciphered the ancient script, they found a warning. The path through the mountain was a trial, a spiritual journey known as the Path of Echoes. It was a place where the mountain's heart tested the souls of all who entered, forcing them to confront the ghosts of their past. As the last of the script was translated by Thane, a chill that had nothing to do with the cold settled over them. The final carving was stark and ominous. It depicted a warrior facing not a beast or an army, but a mirror image of themselves wreathed in shadow. The warning was clear: on the Path of Echoes, the greatest enemy you will face is yourself. Chapter 7: The Echoes in the Ice. The Path of Echoes was a labyrinth of ice and shadow, a silent, frozen world deep within the mountain's heart. The air was still and achingly cold, and the only sound was the crunch of their boots on the icy floor and the drip of melting ice that sounded like a slow, patient clock ticking away the seconds of their lives. The soft glow from moonglimmer cast long, dancing shadows that played tricks on the eye, twisting into familiar shapes before dissolving back into darkness. The warning in the carvings proved true all too soon. The cave was not just a physical space, it was a place that resonated with memory and emotion. The very ice seemed to absorb their thoughts, their fears, and reflect them back as chillingly real apparitions. Thane was the first to falter. He stopped dead, his gaze fixed on a shimmering form in the darkness ahead. It was a young guard, one of the many who had fallen in the courtyard. The ghostly figure looked at Thane, its eyes filled with a silent, sorrowful accusation. "You left us," the echo whispered, its voice the sound of grinding ice. "You were our captain. You were supposed to protect us." I tried," Thane stammered, his shield arm trembling. The guilt he had carried since that night washed over him, a cold tide threatening to drown him. Amari placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm and reassuring. "That is not your fallen brother, Thane. It is your grief. Your regret. Do not let it become your anchor." She looked into his eyes, her own gaze fierce and unwavering. "Those men died protecting their kingdom. They died with honor. Honor them by living, by fighting on." Her words were like a bracing wind, clearing the fog of his guilt. Thane looked from the apparition back to his queen, his resolve hardening. "Forgive me, my queen." He turned back to the echo, his voice now strong. "I will not forget you. But I will not be haunted by you." As he spoke, the apparition wavered and dissolved into a shower of icy dust. One by one, they were each confronted by their own personal demons. Borin and Gorin were forced to face the specter of their fierce rivalry, twisted into a venomous hatred that sought to turn them against each other. Ilara was confronted by a vision of her own arrow striking Amari, her deepest fear made manifest. Each time, they drew strength from one another, their shared purpose a shield against the mountain's insidious magic. Then, it was Amari's turn. She found herself alone in a vast ice cavern, the others having vanished from her sight. Before her stood the shimmering image of her mother, not as the wise ancestor in the portrait, but as she was in her final days, frail and consumed by illness. "You are not ready, my daughter," the echo of her mother whispered, her voice filled with a heartbreaking sorrow. "You lead your most loyal friends to their deaths, chasing a child's story. You will fail them. You will fail Oakhaven." Every doubt Amari had ever harbored about herself, every fear that she was too young, too inexperienced, too weak to carry the weight of the crown, coalesced in that ghostly image. The weight of it was crushing. "Perhaps you are right," Amari whispered, her voice trembling as she lowered her sword. "Perhaps I am not worthy." But as she spoke the words, a warmth spread through her chest, emanating from the very core of her being. It was the fire of her alpha blood, the legacy of 1,000 queens who had faced their own doubts and fears and had not faltered. The true voice of her ancestors rose within her, not as a whisper, but as a roar. You are our blood. You are the mountain. You are the storm. You are the Alpha. Her head snapped up, her eyes blazing with a renewed fire. No, she said, her voice echoing with a power that made the very cavern tremble. You are not my mother. You are my fear. And I will not be ruled by you. She raised Moonglimmer, its light flaring brilliantly, and the specter of her mother recoiled, its form dissolving not into dust, but into pure, white light that illuminated the path forward. The path led to a massive ice wall, behind which they could feel a change in the air, a hint of warmth. Together, Borin and Gorin struck the wall with their axes, and with a great crack, the ice shattered, revealing an opening. They stepped out of the darkness and into the light. Before them stretched a vast, desolate landscape unlike anything they had ever seen. A seemingly endless desert of shimmering black sand and jagged obsidian rock baked under a merciless, white-hot sun. There was no green, no water, no life. It was a dead land, a cursed land. They had crossed the Dragon's Tooth Mountains. They had survived the Path of Echoes. But as they stood at the edge of the sunken lands, gazing out at the hopeless, sun-scorched emptiness, they knew the most grueling part of their journey had just begun. Chapter 8: The Sunken Lands and the Sea of Glass. The heat of the sunken lands was a physical blow. After the biting cold of the mountains, the searing air felt like the breath of a furnace, stealing the moisture from their lips and the strength from their limbs. The sun was a relentless tyrant in a cloudless sky, reflecting off the black sand and obsidian shards with a blinding intensity. This was a land that rejected life. There were no plants, no insects, not even the buzz of a fly. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rasp of their own breathing and the crunch of their boots on the volcanic glass. Their wolves, loyal and stoic, suffered greatly. The hot sand burned their paws, and the sharp obsidian left bloody prints in their wake. Amari felt their pain as if it were her own, her alpha connection a conduit for their misery. She frequently called for rests in the meager shade of towering rock formations, allowing Anya to tend to the wolves' wounds and for them all to sip sparingly from their dwindling water skins. Days melted into a grueling, monotonous cycle of walking, resting, and walking again. The featureless landscape offered no landmarks, and they navigated solely by the sun's position and Alara's keen eyes, which she used to spot the subtle shifts in the desert's texture that indicated the direction they needed to go. Mirages danced on the horizon, promising water and shade where there was only more heat and black sand. The temptation to believe in them, to run towards the illusion of relief, was a constant mental battle. We cannot last much longer, Borin grunted one afternoon, his voice hoarse and cracking. He slumped against a rock, his broad shoulders slumping with exhaustion. His brother, Gorin, stood over him, a silent, weary guardian. Anya checked their water supplies, her expression grim. Another day. Maybe two, if we are careful. Hope, once a burning flame, had dwindled to a fragile ember. Amari felt the despair settling over her pack, a heavier burden than the heat or the thirst. She had led them here, into this wasteland. If they failed, their deaths would be on her hands. As she wrestled with her doubts, Thane, ever watchful, touched her arm. He pointed towards the ground. My queen, we are not alone. Scratched into the black sand were tracks. They were not from any animal they recognized. They were large, reptilian, with long, curving claw marks. They were fresh. Sand scourers, Alara whispered, her face pale. She had read of them in old bestiaries. Vicious, territorial predators. They hunt in packs and are said to be as fast as a striking snake. A new kind of fear joined their weary party, the fear of being hunted. They were weak, exposed, and in the territory of a creature perfectly adapted to this brutal environment. Every shadow now seemed to hold a lurking threat, every gust of wind sounded like the hiss of a predator. They quickened their pace, adrenaline providing a temporary surge of energy, but they knew it was a race they could not win. They were prey, and the hunters were closing in. Late the next day, when their water was gone and their hope was all but extinguished, Alara cried out, her voice sharp with disbelief. There. Look. On the horizon, shimmering in the heat haze, was a silhouette. It was not a mirage. It was angular, man-made. A structure of towers and walls, half buried in the black sand, but unmistakably a temple. The Temple of the Sun. A wave of relief and renewed purpose washed over them. They had made it. But their joy was short-lived. As they drew closer, they saw that the landscape between them and the temple was different. It was a vast, glittering field, a sea of razor-sharp obsidian shards that reflected the sun with a blinding, painful light. And moving across that field, their dark, scaly bodies almost invisible against the black glass, were the sand scourers. Dozens of them. They were gathering, forming a perimeter around the temple, their reptilian heads turning in unison towards the weary travelers. They had been herded into a trap. The temple was the bait, and the sea of glass was the killing ground. Chapter 9. The Temple of the Sun. There was no time for deliberation, no room for a strategic plan. Behind them lay a waterless death. Before them lay a slim, violent chance at survival. The sand scourers, long, sinuous creatures that moved with a terrifying, serpentine speed, began to advance, their hisses carrying across the shimmering glass plain like the tearing of silk. To the temple. Amari's voice was not a plea but a command, sharp and clear as the obsidian at their feet. Do not stop. Do not falter. Fight through them. The charge was an act of sheer desperation. They plunged into the sea of glass, the razor-sharp shards crunching under their boots and tearing at the wolves' already wounded paws. The pain was immediate and excruciating, but the adrenaline of battle was a potent anesthetic. The scourers met them in a wave of snapping jaws and whipping tails. These creatures were pure predators. They didn't roar, they hissed, their movements eerily silent until the last moment of their lightning-fast strikes. The small fellowship became a whirlwind of desperate courage. Borin and Gorin formed the rearguard, their twin axes swinging in wide, brutal arcs. The heavy blades, designed to splinter shields and shatter bone, were devastating against the scourers' scaly hides, cleaving heads from bodies in showers of black blood. The brothers fought with the grim efficiency of men who had accepted their deaths but were determined to sell their lives dearly. From the center of their formation, Elara loosed arrows with breathtaking speed. She didn't have time to aim for eyes or joints, she simply fired into the swarming mass, each arrow a feathered streak of defiance that found a target, slowing a creature here, felling another there, buying them precious seconds. At the head of the charge were Thane and Amari. Thane was a fortress of steel and resolve, his shield taking the brunt of the attacks, its surface quickly becoming a ruin of dents and scratches. He shoved and bashed, creating a narrow path for the others to follow. And then there was Amari. She moved through the chaos not as a soldier, but as an alpha. Moonglimmer was a blur of silver light, a beacon in the maelstrom. She didn't just fight the scourers, she flowed around them, her movements instinctual and deadly. Her alpha senses were on fire, allowing her to anticipate an attack from the side, a tail whip from behind, a lunge from the front. She was a singular point of focus, of hope, in the swirling chaos. They were a bleeding, ragged line, but they were unbroken. For every warrior who stumbled on the treacherous glass, another was there to help them up. For every scourer that fell, another took its place, but their relentless advance was taking its toll on the creature's numbers. Finally, they reached the temple steps. The great stone doors, carved with images of the sun and wolves, were sealed shut. As Borin and Gorin held the screeching horde at bay in a last, heroic stand, Amari, Thane, and Elara threw their combined weight against the ancient portal. With a groan of stone grinding on stone that had not been heard for millennia, the door gave way. They scrambled inside, pulling the wounded twins with them, and slammed the heavy door shut, the sound of the scourer's claws scraping against the outside a final, horrifying shriek. Silence. The contrast was jarring. Outside was frenzied death, inside was a stillness that felt sacred. The air was cool and thick with the dust of ages. Faint light filtered through high, crystalline windows, illuminating a vast, circular chamber. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, and the floor was a mosaic of a celestial map. And there, in the very center of the chamber, resting on a simple pedestal of sun-bleached stone, was the source of the light. It was a crystal, the size of a human heart, that pulsed with a warm, golden light. It was the Sunstone. After all the miles, the monsters, the mountains, and the endless desert, they had found it. A fragile, Desperate hope bloomed in Amari's chest. She took a step forward, then another, her exhausted body moving as if in a dream. Her friends watched, their faces a mixture of awe and relief. She reached the pedestal, her hand outstretched, her fingers trembling as they neared the glowing crystal. This was the culmination of their journey, the salvation of their kingdom. But as her fingertips were a mere inch from the stone's surface, the carvings on the temple walls suddenly blazed with a brilliant white light. The air grew heavy, and a figure coalesced from the shadows near the pedestal. It was not a monster or a beast, but the shimmering, ethereal form of a woman clad in ancient armor, her eyes holding the wisdom of centuries. She held a spear of pure light, and her voice, though not loud, filled the entire chamber. "You have come far, child of the wolf," the spirit guardian said. "But the journey is not what earns the prize. Only the worthy may claim the light." Chapter 10. The Guardian's Trial. The Guardian's presence was immense, radiating an aura of timeless duty. She did not move, yet her silent judgment was more intimidating than any snarling beast. Amari's companions instinctively took a step back, recognizing that this was not their fight. This was a trial for their queen, and their queen alone. Amari slowly lowered her hand, her gaze locked with the spirit warrior's ancient, knowing eyes. She felt the Guardian's power wash over her, a searching force that peeled back the layers of her being, the queen, the warrior, the alpha, seeking the truth of her heart. "Why do you seek this power?" the Guardian asked, her voice echoing not in the air, but directly in Amari's mind. "Do you seek a weapon to smite your enemies? Do you crave the strength to impose your will upon the world, to answer darkness with an even greater force?" As the Guardian spoke, visions flooded Amari's mind. She saw herself wielding the Sunstone like a sword, unleashing its power upon Malakor and the Shadow Pack. She saw them burn, their bodies turning to ash in a glorious, vengeful fire. She felt a surge of triumph, of righteous fury. The power was intoxicating. She saw herself returning to Oakhaven not just as a savior, but as a conqueror, a queen whose might would be absolute, who would never have to fear anything again. The temptation was a sweet poison. The path of power, of absolute victory, was seductive. But then, the vision shifted. She saw the fear in the eyes of her own people as she wielded this immense power. She saw them bow not out of love and respect, but out of terror. She saw the Sunstone's light, once warm and pure, become a harsh, unforgiving glare that cast its own deep shadows. She saw herself becoming the very thing she was fighting against, a tyrant ruled by fear and a lust for control. The vision faded, leaving Amari breathless and shaken. She looked at the Guardian, her heart laid bare. She had seen the darkness within herself, the potential for corruption that lay dormant in every soul. "I do not seek to be a conqueror," Amari said, her voice quiet but firm, resonating with a newfound certainty. "I have seen the path of absolute power, and it leads only to another kind of darkness." She took a breath, meeting the Guardian's unwavering gaze. "I seek the Sunstone not as a weapon of vengeance, but as a shield. I do not wish to destroy the shadows, I wish to protect the light. I fight for the warmth of the sun on my people's faces, for the sound of laughter in our halls, for the right to live without fear. I fight for Oakhaven. Not for my glory, but for their survival." She did not plead or posture. She simply spoke the truth from the very core of her being. She was not just a queen seeking a tool, she was an alpha protecting her pack. A slow, ethereal smile touched the Guardian's lips. The spear of light in her hand faded, and her form grew translucent. "Your heart is true, Amari, queen of the Oakhaven pack. You have faced the shadow within yourself and have not flinched. You are worthy." The spirit warrior dissolved into 1,000 motes of light that flowed into the Sunstone, causing it to pulse with a brilliant, blinding radiance. The trial was over. Amari stepped forward and, with a steady hand, closed her fingers around the crystal. The moment she touched it, an incredible warmth and power surged through her. It was not a violent, corrupting force like Malakor's magic, but a clean, life-giving energy. It flowed into every fiber of her being, mending her wounds, banishing her exhaustion, and filling her with a profound sense of peace and strength. The light of the Sunstone was now her own. Holding the crystal aloft, she turned to her friends. The golden light filled the chamber, washing over them, healing their cuts and soothing their weary souls. Their faces, gaunt and grim just moments before, were now filled with hope. But as the Sunstone's light pulsed in Amari's hand, it projected a swirling image onto the far wall of the temple. It was a vision, clear and terrifying. It showed Malakor, not besieging the walls of Oakhaven, but standing in a grove of ancient, silverbark trees that Amari recognized instantly. It was the Heartwood, the most sacred place in the kingdom, the source of all life in their lands. Malakor was not waiting for them. He was in the process of a dark ritual, chanting in a foul language as shadows bled from the ground, poisoning the ancient trees. A sphere of pure darkness was coalescing above him. He's not trying to conquer Oakhaven, Thane breathed in horror. He's trying to kill the land itself. To extinguish the light forever. The triumphant joy of finding the Sunstone vanished, replaced by a cold, dreadful urgency. Their quest was not over. They had not been on a mission to find a weapon. They had been in a race against a ritual that would doom them all. And as they watched the dark sphere in the vision grow, a horrifying thought struck them all at once. They were not on their way to stop him. They may already be too late. Chapter 11, The Race Against Twilight. The vision in the temple did not fade, it burned itself into their minds. The sight of Malakor, standing not at their gates but at the very heart of their kingdom, defiling the sacred Heartwood, shifted their quest from one of hope to one of desperate urgency. Every second they spent in this desolate temple was another second the lifeblood of their home was being drained away. "We spent weeks getting here," Gurren said, his voice a low growl of frustration as he tested his newly healed leg. "It will take weeks to get back. We'll be too late." "Then we will not travel the way we came," Amari stated, her voice devoid of doubt. She turned from the fading vision on the wall to the celestial mosaic on the floor. Her hand, still holding the Sunstone, was bathed in its warm, golden light. A new sense of connection flowed through her, a current of energy that linked her not just to the stone, but to the sun above and the very ground beneath her feet. The temple was more than a vault, it was a nexus, a focal point of ancient power. The map on the floor was not just a map. It was a conduit. "The Guardian showed me the threat," Amari explained, her eyes tracing the inlaid patterns on the floor. "She must have also shown me the way. This temple is connected to the sun, and the sun's light touches every part of our world." She knelt in the center of the mosaic, finding the cluster of stones that represented the kingdom of Oakhaven. I think I can use the Sunstone to open a path. To travel along the light itself." It was a concept born of instinct and faith, not of logic. A path made of pure sunlight. Thane looked at her, his expression a mixture of awe and deep concern. "Amari, what will that do to you? We don't know what kind of power you are meddling with." "What Malakor is doing to the Heartwood will destroy us all anyway," she countered, her gaze resolute. "This is our only chance. You must guard me. I cannot be disturbed." Her companions formed a protective circle around her, their weapons ready, though they knew no blade could defend against the kind of power their queen was about to unleash. They were her shield, her anchor to the physical world. Amari placed the Sunstone onto the mosaic over Oakhaven. She closed her eyes, placing her hands over the crystal. She did not try to command it. Instead, she opened herself to it, allowing its energy to flow into her, and in return, she poured her own life force, her will, her spirit, her essence as alpha, into the stone. She pictured the Heartwood, not as the dying grove from the vision, but as she remembered it, vibrant, shimmering and alive. She held that image in her mind, a beacon for the Sunstone's power. The temple responded. A low hum filled the chamber, vibrating through the stone floor. The crystal windows high above began to glow, gathering the harsh desert sunlight and focusing it into brilliant beams that converged on the Sunstone. The air grew thick with energy, and the light in the room became almost too bright to bear. Amari gritted her teeth, a sheen of sweat on her brow. The power flowing through her was immense, a raging river of pure solar energy. It threatened to consume her, to burn her away from the inside out. But the image of her home, of her people, held firm in her mind. She became a living lens, focusing the entirety of the temple's power and her own will into a single point. With a final, silent scream of effort, she pushed. There was a sound like the universe cracking open. A pillar of golden light erupted from the Sunstone, shattering the celestial mosaic and blasting a hole in the temple's roof. The light was not a weapon, it was a doorway. A shimmering, swirling portal of pure sunlight, a tunnel through space and time. Amari collapsed, the Sunstone dimming as it rolled from her grasp. Thane caught her before she hit the ground. She was pale and trembling, but her eyes were open, fixed on the impossible gate she had created. "Go," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. "Now." There was no hesitation. Borin and Gorin hoisted their queen, supporting her between them. With Thane in the lead and Alara and Anya close behind, they plunged into the blinding light of the portal. The world dissolved into a torrent of gold and unimaginable speed, leaving the ancient, silent temple of the sunken lands behind them forever. Chapter 12. The Corrupted Heartwood. The journey through the sun portal was not a journey at all. It was an instant of violent, wrenching dislocation. One moment they were in a vortex of blinding light, the next they were sprawled on a forest floor, gasping for breath as the portal snapped shut above them with a sound like thunder. The air was the first sign that something was terribly wrong. Instead of the clean, sweet scent of silver leaf and rich earth that defined the heartwood, a cloying stench of decay and stagnant magic filled their lungs. Amari pushed herself to her feet, her strength slowly returning, and gazed at her surroundings in horror. This was the heartwood, but it was a diseased, dying version of itself. The majestic, silverbark trees, usually shimmering with a soft, internal light, were now streaked with black veins, weeping a thick, tar-like sap. Their leaves, once the color of moonlight, were crumbling into gray ash that coated the forest floor like a morbid snowfall. The life, the very soul of the forest, was being strangled. From the oppressive gloom between the dying trees, figures emerged. At first, Amari thought they were her own paxwolves, but then they stepped into a patch of sickly light. They were larger, their forms twisted and distended. Their fur was matted with the same black sap that bled from the trees, and their eyes glowed with a feral, red light. These were Malakor's creations, mockeries of the noble beasts of Oakhaven. The corrupted wolves circled them, their low growls a promise of a bloody death. Amari's companions formed a defensive circle, their weapons raised. But as the first beast lunged, Amari stepped forward, the Sunstone, now clutched tightly in her hand, blazing to life. She met the wolf's charge not with her sword, but with the stone itself. As the creature's jaws snapped at her, she thrust the crystal forward. A wave of golden light erupted from it, striking the wolf head-on. The beast shrieked, a sound of pain and dissolving magic, as its shadowy form was consumed by the light. It did not leave a corpse, but a pile of purified ash, and for a brief, wondrous moment, the patch of ground where it fell glowed with renewed life, a circle of vibrant green grass in a sea of decay. The Sunstone was more than a weapon against this darkness, it was the cure. Seeing their queen's new power, her companions rallied. They did not need to kill every beast, only to hold the line. A cry for help, faint but clear, cut through the din. Alara's sharp ears caught it first. "That way. Our people." They pushed through the corrupted wolves, Amari's light clearing a path, and found a small patrol of Oakhaven warriors, their backs to a rock, about to be overwhelmed. Their relief and shock at seeing their queen alive was palpable. "My queen!" the lead warrior cried, parrying a savage blow. "You're alive." Malakor. He appeared in the heart of the grove. The forest began to die. "We thought we were all that was left." "The castle?" Thane demanded. "Preparing for a siege," the warrior replied. He sent a portion of his forces to assault the walls, but it was a feint. His true target was here. Amari's blood ran cold. The attack on the courtyard, the siege. It had all been a grand diversion. Malakor had never intended to take Oakhaven by force. He was an assassin, and his target was the very soul of the kingdom. By destroying the Heartwood, he would ensure Oakhaven would wither and die from the inside out, a slow, agonizing death that no castle wall could prevent. She now understood the terrible urgency of the vision. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice hard as steel. The warrior pointed a trembling sword deeper into the dying woods. "At the center. He is at the mother tree. He is unmaking it." Amari looked at her small, battered fellowship, at the handful of weary warriors they had rescued. It was a pitiful force to pit against an enemy who could poison the very land itself. But as she looked at their faces, she saw not defeat, but a flicker of hope, a hope she had carried all the way from the sunken lands. "Then that is where we go," she declared, the Sunstone pulsing in her hand like a second, defiant heart. "The heart of our kingdom is under attack. We are its guardians. We will not fail." Chapter 13. The Siege of Light and Shadow. Their advance toward the mother tree was no longer a stealthy infiltration but a desperate, running battle. The entire Heartwood had become Malakor's personal army. Corrupted creatures lunged from the shadows, hulking bears with eyes of burning coal, swarms of bats that shrieked with human despair, and thorned vines that lashed out like sentient whips. The land itself had been turned against its children. Amari was the tip of the spear. She held the Sunstone high, and it blazed with a golden radiance, a miniature sun in the suffocating gloom. Its light created a moving sanctuary around them, a 30-foot aura of purity that caused the shadow creatures to recoil and the corrupted plants to wither. It was their only path through the blighted forest. They moved as a single, cohesive unit, a testament to their long journey together. Thane was Amari's unwavering shadow, his shield deflecting the physical attacks that broke through her shield of light. His presence at her side was a silent promise that she was not alone. Borin and Gorin were a whirlwind of righteous fury, their axes scything through the abominations that swarmed the edges of the light, their battle cries a defiant roar against the encroaching silence of death. Behind them, Elara and the other warriors laid down a constant stream of covering fire, their arrows tipped with silver and prayer, each one a pinpoint of hope in the darkness. Anya moved between them all, a tireless blur of motion, binding wounds and murmuring words of encouragement, her healer's spirit as vital to their fight as any sword or shield. This was a battle fought on two fronts. The physical toll was immense, but the spiritual assault was more insidious. The dying Heartwood wept around them, its whispers no longer the benevolent secrets of nature, but the insidious lies of decay. It whispered of failure, of rot, of the futility of their struggle. "All things die," it hissed on the wind. "Why do you fight the inevitable?" But Amari had an answer. Midway through their charge, she saw a young silver sapling, its trunk almost entirely consumed by the black rot, its last few leaves trembling. On impulse, she broke from the path and pressed the glowing sunstone against its bark. The effort was immense. She felt the sunstone draw on her own strength, her own life force, and channel it into the dying plant. A pulse of brilliant golden light flared, and the black veins on the sapling's trunk receded like a tide. A single new, perfect silver leaf unfurled at its crown. It was a small victory, a tiny act of defiance, but its effect on her companions was profound. They were not just fighting back the darkness, they were reigniting the light. Hope, fierce and powerful, surged through their ranks. Their steps became surer, their blows stronger. They were no longer just soldiers fighting an enemy, they were healers mending a wound. Finally, they broke through the last line of twisted defenders and stumbled into a large clearing. The sight stole the breath from their lungs. There, in the center, stood the mother tree, the ancient, colossal heart of the entire kingdom. But it was a monument to despair, its massive trunk encased in a crust of solidified shadow, its branches barren and clawing at the sky like a dying giant. At its base stood Malakor. He was not chanting or casting spells. He was simply standing with his arms outstretched, basking in his victory. Floating above him, tethered to the dying tree, was a sphere of pure, swirling darkness, a void that seemed to drink the very light from the air. The ritual was almost complete. He turned his head slowly, a cruel, triumphant smile spreading across his face as he saw them. His voice was laced with mocking amusement. "The fearless queen," he sneered, his voice echoing in the deadened air. "You have arrived just in time to witness the death of your world. A fitting end for your journey, wouldn't you agree?" Chapter 14. The Shadow Alpha. "This world was never yours to kill, usurper," Amari's voice rang out, sharp and clear, amplified by the power resonating within her. The sunstone flared in her hand, casting Malakor's triumphant sneer in a golden, unforgiving light. The final confrontation began without another word. Malakor gestured contemptuously toward the base of the mother tree. The solidified shadow encasing the ancient trunk pulsed, and a portion of it sloughed off, rising and taking shape. It formed into a monstrous wolf, a titan of darkness 20 feet high at the shoulder. It was not a twisted animal but a being of raw, negative energy given form, its body a swirling void and its eyes 2 burning embers of pure malice. "Keep that thing off the queen!" Thane roared, his voice cutting through their stunned awe. He, Borin, Gorin, and the other warriors did not hesitate. With a unified battle cry, they charged the Shadow Titan, a desperate, valiant assault of mortal flesh and steel against a walking nightmare. They knew their role, to buy their queen the time she needed, even if it cost them their lives. Amari strode forward, her focus entirely on Malakor. He met her advance, and the clearing became a battleground of 2 opposing forces of nature. Malakor was a storm of dark magic. He hurled bolts of shadow that sizzled through the air, summoned grasping claws of energy from the ground, and wove illusions of their greatest fears, the burning of Oakhaven, the death of their loved ones. But Amari was a bastion of light. She moved with a newfound grace, the Sunstone an extension of her will. She didn't counter his attacks with equal force but with its opposite. She raised shields of golden light that absorbed his shadow bolts. She stomped her foot, and a wave of purifying energy radiated outwards, causing his spectral claws to dissolve. She held the Sunstone before her, and its true, unwavering light burned away his illusions like mist in the morning sun. It was a duel of philosophies. His power was to corrupt, to tear down, to unmake. Hers was to protect, to endure, to preserve. "Why?" Amari demanded as she deflected another curse. "Why destroy a place so full of life?" Malakor laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "This place? This life? It was stolen from me. From my bloodline." He unleashed a furious barrage of attacks. "My ancestors were of the royal line. They saw the true potential of our blood, the power of blood magic, the strength of the predator. But your weak, fearful ancestors exiled them, branded them monsters, and stole their birthright. I am not destroying your kingdom. I am taking back what is mine, by erasing the stain of your legacy." "My ancestors chose balance," Amari retorted, her sword, Moonglimmer, finally singing from its sheath to parry a blade of solidified shadow. "They knew that true strength lies not in domination, but in harmony. You claim to be an alpha, but you lead nothing. You create only abominations and slaves to your will. You are a poison, not a king." Her words struck a nerve. A guttural roar of pure rage tore from Malakor's throat. "I will show you the strength of the predator." His human form convulsed and tore apart. Bones cracked and reformed, his skin stretched and grew dark fur. But he did not transform into a true wolf. He became a hideous hybrid, a towering creature that walked on 2 legs but possessed the slavering jaws, razor claws, and unholy strength of a nightmare beast. His eyes burned with red-hot hatred. He had shed the last pretense of his humanity, becoming the Shadow Alpha in truth. With a speed that defied his bulk, he lunged, abandoning magic for the raw, brutal finality of physical combat. The duel of light and dark became a primal clash of 2 alphas, one fighting for a crown of shadow and one for the soul of her pack. Chapter 15: The Heart of the Sunstone. The clearing was now home to 2 desperate battles. Thane, the twins, and their warriors fought with the courage of legends, but they were hopelessly outmatched. The Shadow Titan was a force of entropy, its claws of darkness passing through shields and armor to snuff out the life force beneath. Men cried out and fell, their bodies not bleeding but turning to grey dust. Thane, his shield shattered, his arm bleeding from a dozen cuts, still stood his ground, a lone mountain against a tidal wave of death, buying his queen every last precious second. Amari's own fight was just as desperate. The transformed Malakor was a whirlwind of fury. He was faster, stronger, and his rage gave him a terrifying power. He drove her back, his claws ringing against Moonglimmer, each blow sending a jarring shock up her arm. She was a skilled warrior, but he was a monster fueled by centuries of hatred. He finally broke through her defense. A clawed hand raked across her shoulder, tearing through her armor and flesh. The pain was immediate and blinding, but it was the cold that followed that was truly terrifying. A dark magic, a numbing poison, seeped into the wound, sapping her strength, dimming her connection to the Sunstone. The golden light in her hand began to flicker and fade. Malakor threw his head back and let out a triumphant, howling laugh. "The light fades, little queen. Your pathetic hope dies with you." He lunged for the final blow. Amari, staggering, her vision blurring, saw it coming. She saw Thane finally fall to one knee, overwhelmed. She saw the Shadow Titan raise a massive claw to crush him. She saw her kingdom, embodied in the dying mother tree, gasping its last breath. All was lost. The despair she had fought for so long finally washed over her. But in that moment of absolute surrender, a memory broke through the fog of pain and fear. The ethereal voice of the temple guardian echoed in her mind. "Only the worthy may claim the light." She finally understood. The Sunstone was not hers to wield like a sword. It did not belong to her. It belonged to the land. With the last ounce of her strength, she did the one thing Malakor could never have anticipated. She did not try to block his attack. She turned her back on him. Ignoring the monster lunging at her back, she stumbled the final few feet to the blackened, dead trunk of the mother tree. Malakor's claws were inches from her when she thrust the Sunstone deep into a fissure in the ancient bark. It was not an attack. It was a homecoming. She did not command the stone. She released it. With her will, she surrendered all the power she held, all her own life force, all her love for her people, and offered it to the dying tree. Heal was her only thought. Live. The result was not an explosion. It was a birth. A wave of pure, silent, golden light erupted from the mother tree. It was not a destructive force, but a wave of pure, untamed life. The crust of shadow encasing the tree didn't just break, it sublimated into nothingness. The black veins vanished. In an instant, the colossal trunk blazed with its natural, silvery luminescence. From every barren branch, 1,000,000 silver leaves burst forth at once. The light wave washed over the battlefield. The great Shadow Titan, caught in its path, let out a silent, agonized scream as its form unraveled, dissolving into harmless motes of dust before it could strike Thane. Malakor, his claws about to bury themselves in Amari's back, was caught at the absolute epicenter of the rebirth. He was not burned or torn apart. His corrupted form, his dark magic, his very being was simply unmade, utterly annihilated by a power so fundamentally opposed to his that he could not exist in its presence. Amari, her duty done, was thrown back by the gentle but irresistible force of the life wave. The Sunstone was gone, now a part of the tree, its light shining from within the heartwood. Her vision went white, consumed by the brilliant, peaceful light. Her last sensation was not of pain or fear, but of an ancient, profound warmth, like the first sunrise after a long, dark winter. Chapter 16. The Whispering Leaf. The wave of life that had unmade Malakor washed over the clearing with the gentle force of a sunrise. It was a power that healed, not harmed. Thane, who had braced for a death blow from the Shadow Titan, found himself kneeling in a field of newly sprouted silver moss, his wounds closing, the exhaustion in his bones replaced by a surge of warmth. Borin and Gorin, battered and bleeding, pushed themselves to their feet, staring in disbelief as the deep gashes on their arms and armor sealed over, leaving only pristine steel and unblemished skin. The bodies of their fallen comrades did not lie in dust. Where each warrior had fallen, a single, perfect silverleaf sapling now stood, a silent, beautiful testament to their sacrifice. But their relief was instantly shattered by a shared, horrifying thought. They turned as one towards their queen. Amari lay at the foot of the reborn mother tree. The light had saved them, but she had been its conduit. She was pale, her skin almost translucent, and she was terrifyingly still. The deep, poisoned wound from Malakor's claw was gone, but this was a far deeper injury. Anya was at her side in an instant, her hands hovering over Amari's chest. The healer's face, usually a mask of calm competence, was etched with fear. "Her breath is shallow. Her heart is a faint flutter," Anya whispered, her voice trembling. "It's not a wound of the body. She poured herself into the tree. Her life force is all but gone." The victorious clearing suddenly felt like a tomb. They had won. They had saved the kingdom. But they were about to lose the queen who had made it all possible. Thane knelt beside her, his hand reaching for hers, hesitating to touch something so fragile. All the fear he had felt facing the Shadow Titan was nothing compared to the cold dread that gripped him now. As the companions gathered around their fallen leader, a single, shimmering silver leaf detached from a high branch of the mother tree. It did not fall, it drifted, spiraling down with an unnatural grace, glowing with a soft, internal light. It came to rest on Amari's chest, directly over her heart. The light within the leaf pulsed in time with her faint heartbeat, a tiny, golden metronome in the profound silence. "The tree," Elara breathed, her archer's eyes wide with awe. "It's trying to give something back." The leaf was a sign, a fragile flicker of hope. But it was not enough. They were deep in the heartwood, and their queen was fading with every passing moment. "We cannot stay here," Boren said, his usual boisterous tone replaced by a grim solemnity. His brother nodded in agreement. "We have to get her back to the castle. To the royal healers." Thane looked down at Amari's still face. The fearless leader who had guided them through darkness and despair was now utterly dependent on them. He felt the crushing weight of her sacrifice, the immense burden of her trust. He would not fail her now. "Make a litter," he commanded, his voice raw but steady. "Gently. We move as fast as we can without jostling her. Elara, you and the other warriors scout ahead. Ensure the path is clear. Anya, you do not leave her side." They worked with a silent, desperate efficiency. Using their own cloaks and the sturdy branches of fallen, purified trees, they fashioned a carrier. With the utmost care, they lifted their queen. She was lighter than they could have imagined, as if part of her had already passed into the world of spirits. The single, glowing leaf remained on her chest, a solitary beacon in the encroaching twilight of her life. Their journey out of the Heartwood was the very picture of a Pyrrhic victory. They walked through a forest reborn, a landscape bursting with miraculous, vibrant life. The air was sweet, the light was pure, and the whispers on the wind were now songs of gratitude. But at the center of this miraculous rebirth was a profound, silent grief. They had saved the soul of their kingdom, but they carried its dying heart in their hands. Chapter 17. The Weight of a Crown. The journey back to Oakhaven Castle was a somber procession through a world awakening from a nightmare. The path that had been a corridor of death and corruption was now thrumming with life. The black veins on the trees were gone, replaced by the healthy shimmer of silver bark. Animals long since fled from Malakor's blight began to emerge from the woods, deer, foxes, and songbirds, their jeweled eyes watching the solemn fellowship pass with a curious, unafraid gaze. The land itself seemed to recognize the sacrifice that had been made, parting its branches for them, softening the ground beneath their feet. For Amari's companions, this vibrant renewal was a beautiful agony. Every sign of life was a reminder of what she had given. They walked in near silence, the only sounds the rustle of their feet and Anya's soft murmurs as she constantly monitored the queen. The litter felt heavier with every step, not from physical weight, but from the immense responsibility it carried. Thane walked at the head of the litter, his gaze fixed forward, his jaw set like stone. He was no longer just the captain of the guard, he felt like a guardian of the kingdom's last hope. Guilt gnawed at him. He had been sworn to protect her, to die for her, yet he was alive and whole while she lay broken. He channeled his grief into a fierce, unwavering vigilance, his senses scanning every shadow, though he knew the true threat to her life was the one that lay within. Boren and Gorin, who had never shied from a challenge, now moved with a slow, deliberate tenderness that was completely at odds with their warrior nature. They carried the bulk of the litter's weight, their massive shoulders a cradle for their queen. They did not speak of their fear, but it was there in the careful placement of every step, in the way they shielded the litter from a stray branch or a gust of wind. They had followed Amari out of loyalty and duty, they were carrying her home out of love. As they drew closer to the castle, they began to encounter patrols and villagers who had been cowering in their homes. The people emerged, blinking in the clean, bright sunlight, their faces filled with disbelief at the transformation of the forest. Their joy at seeing the blight gone was quickly tempered by the sight of the royal procession. A hush would fall over them. They saw the grim faces of their heroes. They saw the still, pale form on the litter. And they saw the single, glowing leaf on her chest. The news spread faster than a wildfire, a whispered message of impossible victory and unbearable cost. The queen was alive, but she was dying. She had traded her life for theirs. By the time the walls of Oakhaven came into view, a great crowd had gathered at the gates. There was no cheering. There were no triumphant shouts. Instead, a profound, respectful silence fell over the assembled populace. They parted before the heroes, creating a clear path to the castle entrance. Many knelt as the litter passed, their heads bowed in gratitude and sorrow. Some wept openly. They had been prepared to fight a siege, to die defending their walls. They had never imagined a victory that felt so much like a funeral. Elara the Elder and the rest of the royal council were waiting on the castle steps, their faces a mixture of relief and anguish. "The Heartwood is saved," Thane reported, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Malakor is gone." Elara's ancient eyes drifted to Amari's form. "And the price?" he asked softly. "Everything," Anya replied, her voice choked with emotion. They carried her through the grand halls of the castle, the same halls she had strode through with such power and confidence. They took her to her chambers and laid her upon her bed. The kingdom's greatest healers were summoned, but they could only stand by helplessly, their knowledge useless against a wound of the soul. Oakhaven was safe. The shadow had passed. But as the sun set, casting long, mournful shadows across the silent kingdom, the people of Oakhaven began their long, uncertain vigil, praying for the return of the queen who had become the living heart of their world. Chapter 18, A Kingdom's Vigil. The days that followed settled into a strange and somber rhythm. Oakhaven was a kingdom saved, yet it held its breath. The harvests, which had been failing under Malakor's creeping blight, suddenly flourished with an unnatural vitality. The air remained clean and sweet. The light of the sun seemed warmer, the nights clearer. The land was celebrating its freedom, but its people could not. Their joy was tethered to the silent room at the top of the castle, where their queen lay sleeping a sleep that was far too close to death. Anya refused to leave Amari's side, sleeping on a cot by the bed and tirelessly caring for her queen's physical needs. But she knew the battle was being fought in a realm beyond her herbs and poultices. The only sign of life was the golden leaf on Amari's chest, which continued to pulse with a faint, rhythmic light, a fragile anchor holding her tethered to the world. Thane established a permanent honor guard outside her door, with Borin and Gorin as its unshakable pillars. He barely slept, spending his time managing the castle's affairs with a grim efficiency, his every action a question: what would she do? He, the twins, and Elara the Archer became the de facto leaders of the kingdom, their authority unquestioned because it was derived directly from their loyalty to Amari. They were not ruling in her stead, they were keeping her throne warm. But the most remarkable thing happened not within the castle walls, but outside them. The vigil that had begun on the night of her return did not end. The great courtyard of Oakhaven became a sea of quiet humanity. Every night, hundreds of people, farmers, blacksmiths, merchants, children, would gather. They brought no banners, shouted no slogans. They simply came and lit small candles, their collective flames a mirror of the stars above. They shared food, spoke in hushed tones of their queen's journey, and sang the old songs of the kingdom, their voices a soft, hopeful prayer carried on the night air. It was a testament to the kingdom Amari had fostered. She had not ruled through fear or command, but by inspiration. She had shown them the strength of the pack, and now, with their alpha wounded, the pack gathered to protect her with their collective spirit. In the council chambers, Elara the Elder convened a meeting with Thane and the others. "The healers are powerless," the old man said, his voice heavy. "This is a matter of the spirit, of the land itself. She gave herself to the mother tree. Perhaps it is the mother tree that can call her back." Acting on this sliver of hope, a new ritual was born. Every morning at dawn, Elara the Archer would venture into the reborn Heartwood. She would dip a flask into the clear, cool stream that now flowed from the roots of the mother tree and gather a handful of the new, silver moss that grew at its base. She would return to the castle and give them to Anya. Anya would use the sacred water to moisten Amari's lips and would place the living moss on her forehead. It was a symbolic act, a way of reminding Amari's slumbering spirit of the life she had fought so hard to save, a physical connection to the vibrant land that was now inextricably linked to her own soul. Days turned into a week, then two. The kingdom ran smoothly, held together by loyalty and shared purpose. The vigil in the courtyard never waned. The ritual with the water and moss was performed every day without fail. And still, The queen did not wake. A quiet desperation began to settle in. They had defeated the great, external darkness, but now they were helpless against the silent, internal one, watching as the faint light of their queen's life threatened to fade into memory. Chapter 19. Echoes of the Heartwood. While her kingdom waited, Amari drifted in a place of profound peace. It was not darkness, but a warm, gentle light, a sunlit meadow of the soul where there was no pain, no fear, no weight of a crown. She felt the presence of those who had come before her, the ancestral queens, not as voices giving commands, but as a silent, comforting river of strength in which she floated. She was aware, in a distant sense, of the world she had left behind. She felt the constant, worried presence of Anya, the unshakable loyalty of Thane standing guard, the collective hope of her people like a warm blanket. But these sensations were muted, echoes from a shore she had drifted far away from. The peace of the light was a powerful siren song, promising an end to struggle and a final, well-earned rest. Then, a new presence joined her. It was not human. It was vast, ancient, and deeply powerful, yet gentle. It was the consciousness of the mother tree, the spirit of the heartwood itself. It did not speak in words but in feelings, in seasons, in the patient, enduring language of the earth. It showed her the truth of her sacrifice. When she had plunged the Sunstone into its heartwood, she had not just healed it, she had forged an unbreakable bond. The Sunstone, a vessel of pure life energy, had become a new heart for the tree, and in her act of selfless giving, Amari's spirit had become intertwined with it. She was no longer just the queen of her people, she was the guardian of the land, and the land was her guardian. The pack is the land is the pack, the tree communicated, a concept that bloomed in her mind like 1,000 unfurling leaves. The Alpha's heart must beat with the heart of the world. The tree showed her the new life she had created. It showed her the saplings growing where her warriors had fallen, the clean water flowing, the vibrant health of the forest. And then, it showed her the vigil. It let her feel the warmth of 1,000 candles, hear the harmony of 1,000 voices singing for her, feel the unwavering love of a people united in their hope for her return. They were not waiting for a ruler. They were waiting for the missing part of their soul. The peace of the light was beautiful, but the love of her pack was life itself. It was the reason she had fought, the reason she had journeyed to the end of the world. It was the reason she had to return. She made a choice. She turned away from the endless, peaceful meadow and swam back toward the distant shore, toward the echoes of her world. In the royal chamber, Anya was performing the morning ritual. She had just placed the cool, life-filled moss on Amari's forehead. Outside, the first rays of dawn were striking the castle towers. As the light streamed through the window and touched Amari's face, the golden leaf on her chest, which had been fading over the weeks, suddenly blazed with a brilliant light. It dissolved, not into dust, but into pure energy that flowed into Amari's body. Her eyelids fluttered. A collective gasp went through the room. Thane, Boren, and Gorin, who had been standing their endless watch, pushed into the room, their hearts pounding. Amari took a deep, shuddering breath, the first true breath she had taken in weeks. Her eyes opened. They were the same fierce, intelligent eyes they had always been, but now they held a new depth, a new light. Flecks of green and gold, like sunlight seen through a silver leaf, swirled in their dark depths. Her gaze swept over the tear-streaked face of Anya, over the stunned, relieved faces of her giant protectors. Her eyes finally came to rest on Thane, who stood frozen, his hand on the hilt of his sword, his face a mask of disbelief and overwhelming joy. A small smile touched her lips, and she spoke her first word, her voice raspy but clear. "Thane," she said. "Did we win?" Chapter 20. The Fearless Queen Alpha. A month after her awakening, Amari stood on the grand balcony of Oakhaven Castle, looking out over her people. The kingdom was transformed. It was not just healed, it was more vibrant, more alive than it had ever been. The harvest was the most bountiful in living memory, the forests were teeming with game, and a palpable sense of peace and prosperity had settled over the land. Amari herself was transformed. The ordeal had not weakened her, it had forged her into something new. She was still their warrior queen, but a profound wisdom now tempered her fire. Her connection to the land was a tangible thing. She could feel the health of the most distant forest, the purity of the mountain streams, the contentedness of her people. It was a constant, living presence within her. The flecks of green and gold in her eyes were a permanent reminder of the life that now flowed through her veins. The entire kingdom had gathered in the courtyard to see her. A joyous roar erupted as she stepped into the sunlight, a sound so full of love and relief it shook the very stones of the castle. She let the cheer wash over her, a warm tide that affirmed the choice she had made in the sunlit void. She raised a hand, and a respectful silence fell. Her voice when she spoke was not loud, but it carried with its own natural authority, reaching every corner of the massive crowd. "People of Oakhaven," she began, "we have faced the longest night, and we have met the dawn together. The shadow that sought to consume us is gone, defeated not by one person, but by the strength of our pack." She turned and gestured to those who stood behind her on the balcony. "We are all here today because of the courage of heroes." She introduced them one by one. Thane, now Lord Commander of Oakhaven's armies, stood straighter and prouder than ever. Borin and Gorin, hailed as the twin axes of the realm, grinned and waved, their boisterous nature beloved by all. Ilara, the royal huntress, was given command of the newly formed Order of Forest Wardens, tasked with protecting the revitalized wilderness. And Anya, the royal healer, was placed in charge of a new school of medicine, dedicated to studying the healing properties of the land. "Our victory came at a great cost," Amari continued, her voice softening as she looked toward the heartwood in the distance, where the silver saplings now grew tall and strong. "We will never forget those we lost. But they did not die in vain. They died to remind us of a truth we had begun to forget, that a kingdom is not its castle, its army, or its crown. A kingdom is its land, and its people, living in balance. The heartwood is not just a forest, it is our heart. As it thrives, so shall we. As we protect it, so shall it protect us." Her words ushered in a new era for Oakhaven. It was an age of stewardship, of understanding that true strength came not from conquering, but from nurturing. Later that day, Amari walked alone into the heartwood. The forest was awash in the golden light of the setting sun. She came to the mother tree, its silver bark glowing with a soft warm light from within. She placed her palm against its trunk. She felt no separate object, no sunstone hidden within the wood. She felt only a single, strong, steady heartbeat that matched her own. The tree, the stone, and her spirit were one. She closed her eyes, feeling the pulse of her entire kingdom through the soles of her feet. The rustle of leaves, the flow of water, the quiet contentment of her people in their homes, the unwavering loyalty of her friends. She was not a ruler sitting above her kingdom, she was the living, beating heart at its very center. She had faced the whispers of fear, the monsters of darkness, the shadow in her own soul, and the finality of death itself. And she had endured. She had learned that true fearlessness was not the absence of fear, but the courage to love something more than her own life. She was Amari, Queen of Oakhaven, guardian of the heartwood. She was the land, and the land was her pack. And under the watchful, loving gaze of the fearless Queen Alpha, the heart of Oakhaven beat strong and true.